2.
Hello. Now is the time set for the regular board meeting of the Arizona State Schools for the Deaf and the Blind. Do we have the phone live, just as a technical check here? Do we have anyone on the phone?
Hello, this is Lynn.
Okay, great. Yeah, we have the phone kind of piped in here now. Thank you. We're going to start with agenda item 1.01, meeting call to order. Suke, can you take the roll?
Sure. David Nigro.
Present.
Brittany Buchanan.
Present.
Lynn Davison.
Present.
Linda Bove.
Present.
Mike Gordon. Dean Howard.
Present.
P.V. Jantz.
Present.
Aaron Wonders.
Present.
And myself, Suke Kanifa.
Thank you. Thank you, Suke. We're going to go on to 1.02, call to the public on agendized items. Here we're going, taking a hybrid approach as we discussed last time. We had, an email address set up similar to the way we've done for the last couple of years. And then we also are back to in-person comments the way that we used to do it. We have 3 in-person comments for agendized items. And each speaker is going to get 3 minutes. I'll keep the time at 3 minutes. I will stand, and that will be the end of the time. The first speaker is Mark Hansen.
Chair and members of the board, my name is Mark Hansen. I am a retired business owner and an active leader with various organizations, Arizona Association of the Deaf, and the interpreter missed the second one. I am an active member of the deaf, blind, and silent community, and on behalf of those communities, I want to make 2 comments. First, we would like to applaud Superintendent Reichman for filling several key positions with qualified deaf educators who are capable of communicating with staff, families, and community members, both in ASL and English. That is critical. And also for the selection of a new assistant superintendent. Congratulations and welcome. Second, I would like to share the current sentiment within the community regarding what happened in this special board meeting that occurred on May 25th. We were shocked at what happened during that meeting and the procedure itself. Any policy changes, we would think it would be critical and would require a lot of thought and consideration, as well as transparency and collaboration by key stakeholders. And still, we watched that video of that meeting, and it became clear that on short notice, Chair Nigro called a special session regarding the non-renewal of a contract that would impact 3 families who wanted to send their children to Desert Voices. The quorum was barely met, okay, but there were 3 key board members, all respected in their fields and all women, who were not present. And apparently there was a draft presented for a policy change for the responsibility of approving or not approving contracts with private agencies. And the policy would indicate that the board would assume that responsibility rather than the superintendent. or the executive administrative team. The board spent nearly 2 hours talking about Superintendent Reichman and Dr. Benedict's non-renewal of the contract. And it was clear that Superintendent Reichman and Dr. Benedict had given quite a bit of conversation and are competent and have the experience and the qualification to make that decision. When asked who wrote the policy, it was disclosed that Chair Nigro wrote that policy, but generally Maria Murphy is responsible for writing those policies. It seemed that she did not have time to do so due to a family emergency.
No, that's time.
Okay. We are all shocked by that proposal to change that policy, even though one person disagreed and had valid questions that were not addressed. It seems like micromanagement of the agency, and we want that policy that had recently been passed removed.
Thank you. The next speaker is Rose Andriacola.
Hello. Thank you for the opportunity for me to present my comments. My name is Rose Andriacola. I've been an employee at ASTB for more than 35 years. I'm a member of the deaf community, a mother of an ASTB alumni, and there are 3 things that I would like to comment on. First, regarding Superintendent Reichman. As a member of the deaf community, I want to state 100% support for her work in the education of our students. We look forward to continuing to support her while she guides ASTB for the benefit of deaf, deafblind, and visually impaired students. Second, Board President Nigro. During the last meeting, I watched and I was terribly disappointed and embarrassed for the conduct that I saw during that meeting. I'm curious if we did truly follow appropriate procedure. You repeatedly dismissed other board members who asked questions seeking more information and clarification. And you proceeded to put that item to a vote, when it was obvious that not all board members have been fully informed. Number 3, regarding Trisha Waddell. She is an experienced educator, knowledgeable about the importance of language and literacy, and I am confident that she will strengthen the connection between the school, families, and the community. I strongly support the selection of Trisha Waddell as principal of the Tucson campus. And I'm hoping that it is not just interim. Fourth, I want to add, welcome George Martin to our community. We are supportive and welcoming, and we hope for wonderful things. Thank you.
Thank you. And the final speaker is Mary Rimron. You may begin.
I'm waiting until they're done discussing. Okay. My name's Mary Rimron, and I'm the Arizona Association of the Deaf Treasurer. Unfortunately, AZAD President Jason Schmidt was unable to attend today, but we look forward to working together with you, all of you, in the future. In regards to agenda item 6.01, George Martin as Assistant Superintendent, to simply be put, the community has mixed feelings about this contract. There was not enough time for in-depth national search, and some people do feel disappointed that the process happened so quickly. A level of trust is going to take time. Understanding and support must be demonstrated in order to earn the community's approval. Agenda item 6.03, contract to Tricia Waddell. And I'm sorry, excuse me, I know how to sign, but I'm going to talk because they have a limited time. Okay. Tricia Waddell, principal in Tucson. The community is excited and welcome Tricia Waddell. We're looking forward to having her leadership and her leadership skills here at the Tucson campus. It's been said that she is a dynamic leader and that she will do well as principal for ASB and ASD. Agenda item 6.06, the salary increase for Superintendent Reichman. We are in support of a salary increase. She has demonstrated a strong commitment to ASDB. She is making valid decisions regarding legislation that impacts ASDB. She is also collaborating with the leadership teams to make contractual decisions that are appropriate for the agency. She has our full support in the decisions she has and will make, and we agree to a salary increase. And finally, agenda item 7.05, Ombudsman. This position was not successful in the past. Again, a level of trust must be established in order for it to be successful. And I need to make one more comment, and I'm extremely nervous and upset. Your 3-minute timeline is not fairly equal for people that are signers. It takes longer for the interpreters to process information and the deaf people to relay their comments. So 3 minutes is not enough time for the deaf community.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to 1.03, information item, superintendent report, Superintendent Reichman, who joins us via phone. Superintendent Reichman, are you present on the phone? Okay, I thought she was on Zoom, so there wasn't going to be a delay.
So is the audio better?
Yes, no, we can hear you now, Superintendent.
Yes, okay. Yeah, I'm comparing it. I will do that. You don't do the S. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Superintendent. Hello? Oh, there it is. Superintendent, we're ready for your report now, if you are.
Will I go ahead? Okay. Good afternoon, President Nigro, members of ASD, the Superintendent Ricky, the Superintendent Stephen, the ASD community. I'm truly sorry to be here in person with you today. I wish I was to be in person, being both. I have COVID-19 and got infected with still positive, symptomatic, quarantine at home. So my apologies with you. I do have a few brief remarks I want to share with you. First, I want to introduce Mr. George Martin, the new superintendent of Fertility Boston. He was with you there in person today, and I think you have the opportunity to chat with them over this meeting. Mr. Martin comes to us with more than 20 years. We don't have education. 15 of those years with primary focus, student education, all along hoping improvement and reform. Mr. Martin is very interested in creating a school culture of success for students and teachers that are also culturally responsive and promote equity. Mr. Martin has a bachelor's degree in all things, biology, chemistry, environmental sciences, with a minor in teacher education. He has a master's degree in education administration. Mr. Martin is currently working towards his PhD at Northern Arizona University. He will be providing a brief report to the board and the community this afternoon, and he will further introduce himself. The second person I want to introduce that's new to the leadership team is the new principal of the Tucson campus, and that is Ms. Trisha Waddell. Ms. Waddell has a bachelor's degree in English and theater arts from Gallaudet University, with a master's degree in deaf education from McDaniel College. She is currently working on her master's in education leadership from Arizona State University. Ms. Waddell started with ASCB as the assistant principal of the Phoenix campus, that is Phoenix Day School for the Deaf, before she agreed to take on the challenge of being the interim principal of the Tucson campus until she gets her principal certification, and then we will make her permanent. Previously, Ms. Waddell worked at the Colorado School for the Deaf Blind, at the Model Secondary School for the Deaf at Gallaudet University, and at Virginia School for the Deaf Blind. Her area of expertise that she brings to ASCB is extensive experience in bilingual education, classroom instruction, classroom management, assessments, and professional development. Ms. Waddell has worked in all sorts of positions, from being a preschool teacher to an ASL specialist, all the way to being a high school teacher. I think she is well positioned to take on being the principal of the School for the Deaf and the School for the Blind on the Tucson campus. Please welcome Ms. Waddell. And then the third new leader we have coming into the agency is Mr. Jason Lilly. Mr. Lilly is the new Region 3 Director of Itinerant Services that serves Southern Arizona. He comes to us from the Tucson Unified School District, where he works as the program coordinator serving students who are deaf and students who are blind. He is also an adjunct instructor at the University of Arizona in deaf education. Previously, Mr. Lilly worked at the El Paso Regional Day School program for the deaf. That program for the deaf provided itinerant services to students who are deaf across 15 school districts. He has 20 years of experience in education, special education, deaf education, 10 years in the classroom, and 10 years as an administrator. He has a bachelor's degree in anthropology, a master's degree in special education. He also has a master's of education in education administration. He's currently working on his doctorate degree in teaching, learning, and culture from the University of Arizona. Please welcome Mr. Lilly to ASDB. We have a couple of agenda items that I want to note right here. Is later on the agenda, I will also be introducing the new ombudsperson, Ms. Donna Williams, and I will speak to her qualifications at that time. The other agenda item that is noteworthy is we are providing a report to the board on the strategic plan, one-year report. This report will be provided by Ms. Courtney Fritz. She is the one who's been working with the leadership team to collect the data, put the report together, and to prepare this for the board. And she will be reporting out, giving you an overview of the information provided in the first year. The final thing I want to just briefly mention is you may have noticed under the superintendent's report, IHBRA, a regulation specific to IDEA for related services. I want to note that in the May 7th report to the board, the written report, there was a sentence that misstated that no ASL interpreter would be allowed to attend IEP team meetings. That's a misstatement. I want to give a correction that we fully understand and follow through on anytime school districts and or parents request that related services personnel, including American Sign Language interpreters, be a member of the IEP team and or participate in IEP team meetings, that those related services personnel do so. We do have a regulation specific to this that we have put together, and I have asked Maria Murphy to give you a brief overview of what's in the regulation. Ms. Murphy?
Thank you, Superintendent Reichman. For the record, Maria Murphy, Director of Policy and Government Relations. So in response to the direction that was given by the board earlier this year, we have drafted a regulation that essentially delineates what the IEP process is supposed to look like for students who participate in the itinerant programs. And what this regulation does is it talks about what the IEP should contain, the goals for the IEP students, what the procedures are, and it spends quite a bit of time basically delineating what is the responsibility of the school district versus what is the responsibility of ASDB. It also discusses what the makeup of the IEP team should be, and specifically it does state that the interpreter is considered, that their attendance would be considered mandatory if an IEP team member requests that their presence be there. So we believe that this actually, that this reflects what the board's understanding and discussion was in earlier board meetings of this year. And at this time, I'd like to make myself available for any questions, if there's questions.
Yes, this is Superintendent. This is Superintendent.
I'm sorry, Annette, is there a question from the board?
No, this is Linda did raise her hand.
Linda, okay, sure, Linda.
Yes, this is Linda Bove. Superintendent Reichman, I hope that you're getting better. I would like to ask if you don't mind giving the names of those new staff members and asking those individuals if they're present to stand so that we can match faces to names. So if you wouldn't mind, can you repeat those folks that you introduced so we can have them stand up and acknowledge them in the room? That's the first thing that I'd like to ask. Is that okay, Superintendent Reichman?
Yes, this is Superintendent. I don't think that Martin, Assistant Superintendent Martin, is to conducted that.
We are having a bit of a problem with audio, so Superintendent Reichman, I believe you said you would like to have Assistant Superintendent Martin stand. Is that correct?
Yes, this is Annette Reichman. I would introduce Assistant Superintendent George Martin. If he could stand up for a minute.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And then I would like to introduce Miss Tricia Waddell, if she is in the auditorium. Please stand up.
Okay.
Okay. And then the third person is Mr. Jason Lilly. Mr. Lilly, if you are in the auditorium, please stand up.
Yes, thank you. And this is Linda Bove. I do have another question. Is that okay, President Nigro?
Of course.
Okay. Superintendent Reichman, you mentioned the strategic plan, and I did read through that, most of it. And I do think that it's critical for us and for me to see how it has gone over that year, how that implementation has gone. When I read through it, I felt that it was too important to just kind of touch on briefly in this meeting, and rather I would like it if we could put this as a topic on a work study session so that we could have a little bit more thorough conversation about what's working, what's not working, if we need to make any changes, all of that. And we wouldn't want to do that in this meeting because I think it would make it quite lengthy. So is that something that we could do? Would the other board members like to do something like that as well? Have a more in-depth discussion about that one-year report.
This is Superintendent Reichman. Yes, Ms. Fritz will provide an overview of the strategic plan report later in the agenda. And if board members wish to have a work study session to discuss more in depth, we would be happy to schedule one.
Great, thank you.
This is Lynn Davison. I'd like to make a comment. Okay. Dr. Maria Murphy and the policy and members, I thank you. Appreciate all effort and get really look right for our kids.
Lynn, I'm sorry to interrupt. This is the interpreter. We are having a really hard time hearing. Would you mind starting over? I apologize.
I can try. I want to thank everyone who really who attends IEP. I appreciate all the work, direction you made so that we can do. Thank you.
Lynn, this is David. You broke up again there.
Maria, thank you.
You're welcome, Lynn.
Thank you, Lynn. Are there any other questions for Ms. Murphy and this regulation?
This is Commissioner Jantz. Sorry, Ms. Murphy, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time. I do want to get some clarification on IDEA. So, are we saying that the policy for IDEA and for the board, is there something that needs to be changed? Can you clarify exactly what we need to do in regards to the comment that was made?
Okay, so first of all, Board Member Jantz, I do want to let you know that this is a regulation, not a policy, which means that changes can be made pretty much at any time. Essentially, this doesn't really change anything having to do with IDEA. What it is doing is it is essentially, as I said, delineating whose responsibility is what. So especially when we're talking about the itinerant programs, some of the responsibilities with IEP meetings belong to the district. Some of the IEP responsibilities may belong to ASDB. So basically what this regulation does is it's saying, okay, this entity is responsible for A, this entity is responsible for B. And the big thing here, which I believe was the board's concern, is that making sure that it was very clear that interpreters would be considered members of the IEP team if a mandatory member of the IEP team requests the interpreter's presence there. So it's just, it's essentially just writing that down, saying if a mandatory member of the IEP team says we need an interpreter there to participate in the IEP meeting, then the educational interpreter is expected to be at the meeting.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. In the event that someone does request that the educational interpreter be there, who and what roles can request that the interpreter be there? Excuse me, what is their role in the meeting as well?
So, so what is their role in the meeting?
Correct.
Okay, so it is my understanding, and again, I'm not an expert in IDEA, but it's basically if they have knowledge or expertise regarding that particular child, including all of those related services. So I may request some additional clarification from Jay. Do you want to take this specifically?
This is Suke. Can I ask a follow-up that tags on to Mr. Jantz's?
Yes.
I think for me, what I want clarification is, are they there to interpret the meeting, or information on the child's use of an interpreter in the school setting? That's the clarification I'm seeking.
So the way that this regulation is written, it states that if the IEP team member requests the attendance of the educational interpreter, then the attendance of the educational interpreter is mandatory. It's silent as to whether they're there to interpret or to offer anything else.
So I have a follow-up,
Yes.
and here's my concern. If that educational interpreter is part of the IEP team providing information in the IEP regarding the child's use of an interpreter, I have no issue with that. I do have an issue if we are not providing certified licensed interpreters for IEP meetings. There is, not all educational interpreters are certified and licensed, and state statute requires a licensed interpreter for those non-educational settings, and I would consider an IEP meeting to be outside of an educational academic arena, and therefore they should not be interpreting for the IEP meeting, and I would like to see some clarity there. I would also like to add that if we are looking at language acquisition for a student utilizing an educational interpreter, I also think an ASL specialist needs to be involved as a mandatory participant in that IEP meeting. They would have the role of assessing a child's language more so than the educational interpreter would.
Board Member Kneifel, as I said, this is it's a regulation, so we can make some additional clarification. And if you would like me to make those additional clarifications and follow up at a future board meeting, I would be happy to do that.
I would love that. Thank you.
Okay.
Suki, if I may just give the board some context. Since we've been talking about this since last November, and it's been on our board. We had a section on it in January. We discussed it at other times. The key part of it that we found through that process was although we have a similar regulation in the brick and mortar schools, we didn't have any written documentation as to how we were going to work with districts in the co-ops. And that was problematic because we were falling back on agency practice, which we discovered in November left some discretion to administrators in the co-ops, and that may have led to an IDEA noncompliance issue, or at least it opened the door for one to potentially occur, although we've reviewed the facts and thus far we're not aware that any violations or noncompliance events have occurred. But we felt that it was going to be best to document this process in a regulation where there just was no documentation before. So this regulation mirrors the one from that we use in the brick and mortar schools, but Ms. Murphy has changed it to adapt for the fact that in the co-ops we act as service providers. So we had to make some changes. We can control the service providers. We don't hold the IEPs in those cases. We can't control everything. Many of those key decisions are going to be made by the individual districts and the individual IEP teams. The exact makeup of the IEP team is up to the IEP team, and the districts have a big say in that. So if a child needs an ASL specialist, if that person needs to join the IEP team, that's really up to the individual IEP members, and that's fine, and that's going to vary from district to district and child to child. I think what's important here in the regulation, so again, this is a much broader in scope than we originally set out to do, but what we've done here is document a written regulation where, if it's followed, there wouldn't be noncompliance events. In other words, if a the IDEA tells us that if a IEP team member requests another IEP member be present, then they have to be present, and the agency can't withhold that. And the agency just can't withhold that. That's the issue. So, Ms. Murphy, you had your hand up, and then I think some other board members wanted to talk.
Yes. Board Member Kneifel, I also wanted to point out that when it discusses in the section that it does discuss the IEP team, it does have a bullet that states, at the discretion of the district parent or ASDB, other individuals who have knowledge or expertise regarding the child, it can including related services personnel. So that could include the ASL specialist, et cetera. So even though we don't have it say ASL specialist particularly, that's kind of a catch-all provision that would take care of it in that instance.
And I'm good with that. My one follow-up again is making sure that it is clear that it is not the role of the educational interpreter to be interpreting those meetings, because there is state statute requiring certification and licensure.
And that makes perfect sense.
Thank you. Just a technical note. If everyone on the phone who's not speaking, mute. I understand there's some echo on the line, so if we could have everyone who's not speaking be on mute and then unmute to speak. Okay, PV.
This is Board Member Jantz. Making sure there was no feedback there. Thank you so much for that, President Nigro, and also Ms. Murphy. For related services, it seems to be a broad category as far as their role in the meeting. And at a minimum, we need to make sure that we have a definition in place to clarify the roles and expectation of the educational interpreter in the meetings. And I agree with what Board Member Kneifel mentioned about the interpreter's role in the IEP meeting. I think it's important that we do look into potentially developing some guidance and potentially becoming policy, clearly delineating the educational interpreter's role in an IEP meeting. For example, they may not be the expert on children's behavior. They may not be the language analysis expert in the room. They may not be the expert on whether or not the child is learning. They're not the expert in those different areas. The purpose of their involvement is to talk about what they've seen in the classroom, how the student is using the interpreter, if the interpreter is in the classroom and providing the interpretation at the appropriate times. And you can even ask the student, and you can ask the interpreter for specific information, but it's not their role to comment on the child's language and their language development. The best practice would be to have the expert do the analysis on the child's language, and it should be someone, the person that's doing that should be the ASL specialist. Now, with ASDB being an LEA, we have to do our due diligence to ensure that we're meeting our responsibilities when it comes to the LEA, and we want to make sure that we have those roles clearly delineated for the co-op so there aren't those gray areas. It's in the best interest of the kids to look at best practices, not just what the minimum is required, but we should be looking at best practices in general.
This is David Nigro. PV, just to note, we are not an LEA with respect to these children. These are all children in the co-ops. The IEPs are held by the individual school districts.
President Nigro, I have a question.
Sure.
Can we get some clarification on a regulation as opposed to a policy?
Ms. Murphy?
What is the difference? Yeah, Ms. Murphy?
Certainly. So, Board Member Bowe. Oh.
Sorry, one second, Ms. Murphy, just a moment. Sorry, I wanted to expand on my thought. I generally do understand the difference, but in this specific conversation, I understand that we have written this regulation. Do we need to have a policy that is something a little bit more solid, giving us a little bit more firm footing, or is a regulation sufficient? And I'm wondering if you have an opinion on that.
I believe that a regulation is sufficient in this particular instance. So what the policy does is the policy is the board's general statement of how the board believes certain actions should be conducted. And then the regulation is what tells the administration and the people who are working at ASDB how they are to carry out what the board's wishes are in any specific instance. So in this particular case, we know that the board wants to make sure that educational interpreters are included at IEP meetings if a member of the IEP team requests their presence there, and the regulation tells us, as people who work at ASDB, how we're going to implement that. Is that helpful?
Yes, that helps. Thank you.
Okay, are there any more questions for Ms. Murphy? Seeing none, Superintendent Reichman, you may finish your report.
That concludes my board report.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Superintendent Reichman. We can now move on to 1.04, information item, Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum Instruction, Assistant Superintendent Martin.
Thank you, President Nigro, Governing Board members. Thank you to Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendent Cooper, community, staff members. It's humbling and an honor to be here, and I'm going to add just a little context to that. I'm the youngest of 7. I have 6 older sisters. I grew up with a single mother who worked, and I was a victim of public schools. I did not learn. Black kids were told to sit in the back of the classroom while the other kids were taught. My mother never asked those questions when I would come home to say, you know, what did you learn today? She would say, how was school? And being young, I would say, it was great. Because I didn't do anything. That followed me until high school. So when I got to college, and I'm going to be brief with this story, I had to take certain classes. I had to learn how to learn. And I went to my counselor and I said, hey, I want to be a doctor. And she laughed in my face and told me I could never become a doctor. And that, I think, lit the fuel under me to never have kids in schools to be in a situation that I grew up in. So I took that personally. And I was a person, I never wanted to be a teacher. I ran away from education, and I was telling the story today. I fell backwards into it by tutoring at a high school and found out I had the ability to teach and help students. So my career has been on creating schools where there are people who do not have the opportunity, they are underserved, they're marginalized, to have the same opportunities that every other student has. That is something I've never wavered from. And I joke with people that know me in the education field. I tell people I create schools and reform and transform schools that I would send my kids to. And I've never wavered from that. I know how it felt to be that student, and so that's been my guiding force in my career as an educator. I've been across the country in school reforms, reforming public schools. I've written charters, opened up schools, so I've gravitated towards making it better. If for some reason, and there was a soul searching for me to come here. And I had to reach out to people I know to make sure that I could be here and have an impact. And so it was something that I had to actually go through. So I'm maybe going off script, so forgive me, but my presence and my goal is this is not just me. It takes the community. It takes the board. It takes staff members. It takes everyone to make this go. And I see myself as a part of that process. Transforming schools looks magical, but it is patience. It is time. It is listening. It is not quick. There are things that will move quick. But I am an educator. I love what I do. I love making schools better for people. It makes me feel good at the end of the day when I know that I've broken that cycle that was once before me. So I am a father of 2. I am a husband. I love learning. When I figured out I could learn, and I just never stopped going to school. And so I joke, my PhD, my doctorate is finished, and I'm already thinking, gosh, what else can I go to school for and learn? But in a nutshell, I'm glad to be here. I have taken this time to meet people, to really just get a sense of where the heart of this organization and institution lies, to look at the passion, to look at the struggles, to look at where people are. But, you know, I will be out with leaders, with people, working side by side. You know, for me, it's important to be able to see. You will always, if you need me to listen or talk to, that's what I'm there for. So this is a process that takes the superintendent, assistant superintendent, staff members, boards, community. Community is the biggest part of getting a school in a different direction. So I'm happy to be here. I have a lot of respect for the people I've met, and it feels great. Prior to coming to here, I was in Mesa Public Schools. I took over some alternative schools and turned them around and worked with some other school projects, and I went to ASU to create curriculum, basically to create access for K-12 students across the country and abroad. It was great. We got to create, we got to do. It was magical. But for me, if you know me, I am a school-facing person. If there's no bells, no noise, no school issues, I literally go crazy. So that gives you a little bit about my personality and why I'm here and who I am. And again, thank you, President Nigro and the board. Thank you to Superintendent Reichman. And it took me to believe in her philosophy and her direction. It took me to believe in the team that I interviewed with. And to meet people. So although that was an interview where they were looking at me, I was also interviewing them as well and learning. So it was a decision that I made with my family. I made it very quickly because for me it's about having impact and making something a little bit better when I leave. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Are there any questions for Mr. Martin from the board? Okay, thank you. We can move on to 1.05, information item, Assistant Superintendent of Agency Operations and Support Services Report, Assistant Superintendent Cooper.
Good afternoon, Board President Nigro, Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendent Martin, members of the board, ASTB community, and staff members. Each of the directors have provided to you their departmental reports. There is no additional information that has come forth since the reports were provided to you last week. As it relates to other projects going on with operations and support services, I wanted to give an update on the agency sunset audit. As most of you are aware, the audit began in April, and over these last few months, staff have been responding to questions, and the auditors have been asking a number of questions over these last couple of months based on 13 sunset factors. We had our most recent update meeting with the auditors on June 23rd, and we were informed that we would receive a first draft of the audit report by August 1st, with a final report expected to be issued by September 15th. Based on the information provided thus far, the agency has made significant improvements since the last sunset audit, which was completed in 2012. So I want to thank all of you for your hard work and continued efforts in ensuring the agency meets its responsibilities to provide the education for our students. Now that the budget legislation has been finalized, the team is continuing to work on building the new year budget as the fiscal year began on July 1st. And the agency's budget submission package is due on or before September 1st to the state's Office of Strategic Planning and Budget. Included within the agency budget will be funding 10% statewide salary increases for all ASDB full-time and part-time staff. Also within the budget legislation, we received $1.1 million in one-time funding to expand the transportation and bus route capacities for both Phoenix and Tucson campuses. And we also received about $866,000 in funding to purchase food service equipment for both campuses, purchase and install security upgrades across both campuses, and install a classroom notification system on the Phoenix campus. As you recall, this year we received funding for the classroom notification system on the Tucson campus. So that gives us about $2 million in additional one-time funding. We have not quite received final amounts from the state on what the agency's total operating budget will be, so we are not sure what additional funding issues will be needed for the agency, and we expect to receive final budget amounts in late July, early August. Last but not least, over the last few months, I've been giving updates on the compensation structure analysis. Since I know most of you are very much interested in what to possibly expect for the upcoming school year and if there will be any additional adjustments to your salaries. More information will be provided by our Executive Director of Human Resources in Agenda Item 6.07. That concludes my report, and I'm open to answer any questions or respond to any comments that you may have.
Thank you, Assistant Superintendent Cooper. And if I just make a comment, Assistant Superintendent Cooper did not make enough about the auditor meeting that we had. I was at that meeting. I want to remind everyone the context of this. You know, if we go back 10 years before many of us were on the board, before Superintendent Reichman was here, we look at the last sunset audit. There were 3 findings and 32 audit recommendations. And if you can go back and review that, and you know, that was quite a document back then, 10 years ago. We, again, in the preliminary meeting, which, you know, things may be subject to some change, but as a preliminary matter, there's 1 finding and 5 recommendations. And I heard them and what the auditors think, and it is night and day from what that was 10 years ago. So I know the staff has worked really hard with the auditors since March to get them a lot of different information. They, uncovered turned over every rock and looked everywhere they could. So to have, and this is not to say there's not work to be done. There is work to be done. We're going to have to address their finding right away. We're going to start to do that from a board perspective in October. And that part was already kind of part of our strategic plan anyway, got delayed a little bit because of COVID. And the findings we're going to address pretty quickly. We'll do all of that in the November meeting. The report will be finalized in October. This way we have the final report in our hand when we go in and take some steps to go in and respond to it. But, it's just a tremendous job that's been done by the leadership here and, by the agency, as a whole. To know that we are operating so much better now as an agency than we were 10 years ago. It's just an incredible difference. And as soon as we hung up, I called up the superintendent and I said, I'm so proud that, that you guys are doing so well. These findings, again, we have work to do, but it is night and day from where the agency was 10 years ago.
This is Commissioner Jantz. Thank you. I know I have made this comment before, and I will make this comment again, and I have told Superintendent Reichman many times that hiring Ms. Cooper was one of the best decisions for the agency. It really turned things around for the agency, and it really provided the board with data on funding, and it helped Superintendent Annette Reichman make the decisions that she needed to make. And the board has had to make some tough decisions, unfortunately. There have been some things at the last 40 or 50 or 60 years that have not been addressed that we are finally addressing. And with Assistant Superintendent Cooper here, I don't think we would be where we are without you here. So I appreciate your work, and I wanted to make that comment. I'm so happy to know that you were at that meeting, President Nigro, with the auditors. Were any other board members invited to that meeting, just out of curiosity?
The auditor requested my presence. There are no other board members.
Out of curiosity, why were no members of the Finance Committee invited to be a part of that meeting?
You would need to ask the state auditors. They invited me. I didn't volunteer. They wanted me to join.
In the future, for something that is that important, I think the board could use more transparency. And I think having someone from the Finance Committee at future meetings with the auditor would be beneficial. I just wanted to make that comment.
Are there any other questions for Assistant Superintendent Cooper? All right, seeing none, we're going to go to 2.01 action item, approval of the consent agenda consistent with board policy to include items 3.01, 5.01, 6.01, 6.02, 6.03, 6.04, 6.05, 7.04, 7.06, and 7.07. Is there anyone that would like to remove any of these from the consent agenda?
This is Board Member Jantz. Yes, I would like to hold aside the Bureau contract, the Berger contract, and the Assistant Superintendent Martin contract.
Sorry.
And also for Christopher Fears.
Sorry, what number are those, Phoebe?
501, 601.
501.
Let me get the numbers for you. For the first one, 5.01, 6.01, 6.04, and that one is specifically for Christopher Fears.
Okay, is that all?
Also, for policy changes, 7.03. And lastly...
Well, that's not on the consent agenda.
7.07.
703 is not on the consent agenda.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. That would be 7.04.
704, okay.
Yes, and then last, the meeting minutes, 7.07.
7.07. Okay. Are you going to move that we remove these from the consent agenda?
So moved.
This is Linda, I second.
Okay. All in favor of that motion, please say aye.
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 On the phone?
Aye.
Okay. Nay would be me. The motion passes. Those are removed from the consent agenda. All right. We do need a motion to pass what's left of the consent agenda.
So this is Sue Kay. I'm trying to make sure that I'm
Sure.
getting them all
So
correct.
the one that's going to be on the consent agenda is going to be 3.01, 602, 03, 05,
And 06.
and 06. Yeah, there we go.
All right, so I move that we approve the following consent agenda items: 3.01, 6.02, 6.03, 6.05, and 7.06.
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? No? Okay, motion passes. Let's see, so 3.01 passed. 3.02, action item, approval of new district agreements, Assistant Superintendent Martin.
For our vouchers, 21-22 ASDB data, we have 598 voucher students, 565 fee for service. Our new agreements with Blueprint Education, we have 0 students are expecting one in the fall. With Imagine Coolidge Elementary, we have 1 voucher student. And for Pace Preparatory Academy, we have 1 voucher student.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Martin? Seeing none, I move that we offer the contracts as proposed. Are there any seconds?
I second.
I also second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Aaron.
Okay. Next is 4.01 information item, finance report. Kim Bittridge.
Good afternoon, Board President Nigro, Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendent Cooper, Assistant Superintendent Martin, members of the board, and ASDB community. Our most recent Financial Committee meeting was held last Thursday, June 30th, with board members Aaron Wonders, Mike Gordon, and P.V. Jantz. Also in attendance were Assistant Superintendent Cooper. During the meeting, we discussed the May 2022 and 2021 budget to actual comparison reports. We also had a presentation from Kendra Benedict on ELP enrollment and the overall ELP program. Provided to you is the same financial information that was provided to the Finance Committee, but in a more condensed, summarized version. The total student count for June 1st, 2022 is 22,034, an increase of 42 students when compared to the June 1st, 2021 count of 2,192. The major differences are an increase in the regional co-op students of 18, a decrease in preschool students of 17, and an increase of birth to 3 students of 45. As of June 1st, we had 492 FTEs, which includes 8.5 FTEs at FBC. We currently employ 717 employees. Some of them are part-time. There are currently 118 vacancies across the agency. In the financial comparative data, the collected revenue for budget fiscal year 2022 is $29.2 million, 3.6% lower than budget fiscal year 2021 revenue of $30.2 million. The primary decrease is as a result of voucher revenue for April was not received until June. This was offset by the increased revenue for the Prop 301 funds. The increase in obligated expenditures of $500,000 in budget fiscal year 2022 compared to budget fiscal year 2021 is based on the reduction in payroll and equipment offset by the increase in professional and outside services. On page 7 of the report, it shows the budget to actual expenditures as well as the remaining budget balance by object class, by fund, and by program. The high number of vacant positions has resulted in salary and ERE being under budget by $8.6 million year to date. The professional and outside services is over budget by $900,000 since we did not anticipate the increased costs in FBC contracts or the contractual transportation services. Page 9 has the expenditures by operational area, by object code, and by fund. Overall, the cost for each operational area has remained fairly consistent. However, the expense categories have changed specifically in transportation and food services. Page 12 has the budget status report for all sources. It is important to note the revenue exceeded the expenditures for budget fiscal year 2022 by $464,000, while the revenues exceeded expenditures by $2 million in budget fiscal year 2021. The budget fiscal year 2022 actual revenues were $49.5 compared to $49.5 million compared to $51.2 million in budget fiscal year 2021. Again, the major differences were the $3 million decrease in vouchers, offset by $1.7 million increase in Prop 301 funds. The budget fiscal year 2022 actual expenditures and encumbrances were $52.8 million compared to $52.3 million in budget fiscal year 2021. The increase in actual expenditures includes $1.8 million in professional and outside services for food service contract, FBC services, and transportation and related services, including one-to-one nurses. An increase of $710,000 in other operating, resulting from the increase in risk management and the maintenance of the fleet and increased costs of fuel. If there are no other questions on the information presented, this concludes my report of the agency's information and fiscal data for the business services. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we'll go to 5.01, approval of Burger Performing Arts Center and other rental agreements. This was on the consent agenda. Sure.
This is Board Member Jantz. I only request that we help this one separately for discussion because I noticed that sometimes for the burger contract, we are able to have a date created before the board meeting. So I want to make sure that we, as a board, need to review and approve the contracts for burger to make sure that we are getting good revenue from it for the campus. What I'm seeing and what I'm hearing from the community, not just the deaf community, but also the hearing community, is that this is a place that the community really looks to for events, and we don't want to create any unnecessary barriers when people are interested in renting out the space. Out of curiosity, are we creating more barriers by having the board review the contract for approval? And what can we do to have the contract ready in place sooner so the board can have access to that contract sooner as well?
I'm assuming that's a question for Superintendent Reichman.
I'm actually asking the board.
The contract as you can see from the list, are generally list community groups. And generally do not use with providing direct services to students on the
Superintendent Reichman, I'm very sorry to interrupt. Can you please start your statement over? We're having a very hard time hearing you.
Yes, so what should I do? Is this better?
Yes, that is better. Thank you.
Okay. So with the Berger Performing Arts Center, the contracts you see listed there are with organizations and community groups outside of ASCB that come and contract with us to use this particular auditorium. It has nothing to do directly with providing services to our students on the Tucson campus. So the recent policy change does not impact the BPAC contract.
This is Board Member Jantz. I would like to provide some clarification. I want to make sure that the board is familiar with the contract requirements, and if we had a specific date in mind, how would we be able to review the contract before we meet as a board? Are we creating more barriers for the community? Is it necessary for the board to be reviewing that contract, or is that something that perhaps should no longer be a contract requirement for the board to review that policy?
PV, this is David. I've been asked to give breaks every hour and 15 minutes this meeting instead of every hour and a half for the interpreters. So we're going to take that break now. So we'll be back in 10 minutes.
This is Linda David. Linda Bogue speaking. Feel like we were kind of left hanging with a question that was on the table without an answer. So can we finish getting an answer to that question and then take a break?
That's fine. In another minute, Superintendent Reichman?
Yes. Again, there's no connection between the contracts we have for the BPAC and direct student services. As for the timeline of these contracts, some of them have already occurred, so you are post-approving these contracts. So this has been the way business has been conducted between the board and the BPAC, the Berger Performing Arts Center, since before I became superintendent. So there's no change here. There's no barrier here.
This is David. PV, this has been a consent agenda item for every single meeting in the last at least 7 years since I've been on the board. There's no change in this to our prior practice. You can go back again, look at every meeting in 7 years. It's always been on the consent agenda. Why we need to get board approval for these, I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and look on the policies to see. I would think that if one of these organizations was somehow objectionable or would bring people that are dangerous to our community to the BPAC, that we would take some action against it. Again, we're a public agency. I don't even know what that action would be, but we'd have to look into it. If there was going to be, again, some sort of just, some vile organization, let's say, were to want to use the space, or an organization that would bring, again, people that are dangerous, we have to take a lot of care on this campus because we do have students and we have residential students, so we want to be careful with who comes onto campus. In most of those cases, there's no issue, and there hasn't been an issue every time we've passed this on the consent agenda. As Superintendent Reichman mentioned, many of these happened in the past. We're merely ratifying it. I don't recall any time in that last 7 years where there has been some kind of issue with the group that's been seeking to rent the BPAC. I suppose we can direct Superintendent Reichman to go back and verify that the policies indeed require board approval for renting to outside groups. I'm not sure if they do, or if just it's been a practice that's been carried over from, prior administrations. With that said, it is now going to be 5:20, so we're going to take that break.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay. They're trying to figure out why we're getting that kind of, yeah, because Annette's, I already said, I'm muted too, I'm off on the Zoom, so I'm like, I don't know, yeah.
I did. I'll probably stop by here.
Yeah, well, first he told me to call Annette, and then Annette says, I am. We've both been out, you know.
Still have mine.
So, but then he
and all that other stuff. So
Determine when the agreement can come in play. But that's been actually delegated to our facilities manager.
yeah, I mean it's.
So I think we can pull it if the board agrees.
You headed out.
No, I'm going to hang out.
I like seeing this group that we think is I know.
That part, yes, that makes sense.
I know.
Yeah. So I can see the
Let me come down here. So.
lots better on. Yeah.
Amen. 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 Preach, girl. Just saying. I'm sitting here going like this.
Yeah, yeah.
And Lynn kept going. Oh no, not at all. You couldn't tell by my face. I'm like,
Okay, you know, that makes sense. From that perspective.
For that.
I will
For
bring
that.
up Jamie Army, the person you
Yes, they do. Okay, I just wanted to help clarify. But again, thank you. Thank you.
Oh, but she said it and you were like, what? So I was like, oh, there it is. There you go.
I got waylaid, I'm telling you. I went out this way and got turned around. Because I usually go out this way. So then I found my way to the bathroom, but I got stopped like 3 times on the way to the bathroom. I'm like, I gotta get there.
We have 1 minute.
Who's Linda? Do we see Linda? We need to flash the lights in the hallway.
Yeah,
to let
right,
them
to
know.
let them know.
Yeah. Flash the lights in that lobby, please.
I'm going to start discussing each one of the
Bathroom, and I think they turned off the water on the sink. Yeah, for clearing a building.
So just like we
All right, it is 5:30, so we are going to return now.
we're going to start talking.
Experience with you?
So we were on 5.01. I think we just had that discussion. Is there any further discussion on 5.01?
Yes, this is Board Member Jantz. Thank you, President Nigro. I appreciate that break as well. I'm sure the interpreters and other members of the board appreciate it also. If the board does need to approve something that's already happened, if it's possible to consider this removing this from future agendas, I am definitely open to that if it's something that the board does not need to be involved with.
Can I say something? I would like clarification from Ms. Murphy as to whether or not there's policy on that. And the only reason I would have concerns from completely removing it, even post-occurrence, is that if there were a group that would sue for us turning them down from utilizing the facility, that lawsuit does usually include the board. And I would like to have some input on whether or not that's, or at least some guidance from policy.
Board Member Kneifel, after an initial review of the policy manual, I did not see anything specific that states that the board is required to approve these. However, again, it was a very cursory review, so I'd like to have the opportunity to take a day to just pour over it and make absolutely certain. But yes.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy. PV?
You go ahead.
I was going to say it seems like there may not be a policy that we may be able to remove it. The benefit of having it here, and again, it's been on the consent agenda for years and years, the benefit is if there is a group that we think has a propensity to be violent or commit acts of destruction or to otherwise endanger our community here, whether it be children or staff, we'd want to know about it, and we'd want to work within the confines of the law to mitigate that risk. But that said, I know that our staff is equipped to do that, and they likely don't need our intervention.
Thank you, President Nigro. And I agree with you, and I agree with Board Member Kneifel as well. Perhaps instead of a consent agenda item, perhaps we could look at a policy change to say that it would be part of the report that we receive, so we're still aware of who is contracted and who is in the building. That way we can maintain our knowledge of that.
Thank you, PV. We wouldn't need a policy for that if, in fact, there's not a policy that says we have to approve these types of contracts. We could just not put it on future meetings and have the superintendent either let us know in her report or Assistant Superintendent Cooper, or whichever it fits into, to do that. But we don't need another policy to change that. It really would more be practice, unless there are other board members that feel differently or would like to keep it on.
This is Board Member Chance. I do think it is worth looking into and getting us the official notice on it. That way at the next board meeting we can talk things over. For now, I would like to make the motion to approve the contracts for Burger Rental.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. And second, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, we can move on to 6.01, consent agenda item, intent to offer fiscal year 2023 employment contract to George Martin, Assistant Superintendent Curriculum and Instructional Services, pursuant to ARS 3843103A1. The board may vote to go into executive session for the purposes of discussion and consideration of employment matters. This was on the consent agenda item, or this was on the consent agenda, it is now not, so we open it to any comments. PV?
Thank you. This is Board Member Jantz. Thank you, President Nigro. My request was for two reasons: that we take the time to address the community concerns about the contract, and secondly, to share my experience with Assistant Superintendent Martin. To make sure that we are addressing the community concerns. I completely understand the community concerns, and I share a similar concern. When we found out about the appointment, I requested a meeting with Superintendent Reichman, and she did provide me with a brief explanation on why the panel was in 100% support of the hiring of Assistant Superintendent Martin. And with that full confidence, I was willing to accept that as a fair decision. But I did request, if it is fine, to have a meeting with Assistant Superintendent Martin. Superintendent Reichman did approve that last week. Assistant Superintendent Martin did confirm that he has been pretty much put in the hot seat since the first meeting, and I brought those questions to him left and right. And I see him kind of laughing. I don't think he was expecting some of those difficult questions that came in that meeting. And I can guarantee to the deaf community that I was pretty blunt with some of the questions that I asked and some of the comments that I made. And he really took those questions well. And it was a wonderful discussion that we had, and we were scheduled for an hour. We went long. We went a half hour over because of our lengthy discussion. It was a great discussion that we had. And Assistant Superintendent Martin seemed very open to the ideas that I had. From the deaf community perspective, I brought up some of the concerns, and I provided him with some potential homework. He said that he was interested in reading a couple of articles. One is called Deaf Epistemology. And the second article, is Deaf Epistemology, a Criticism. And I recommended that he read those two articles. He agreed to reading those two articles. We had a nice heart-to-heart discussion. I talked about my experience and my background that I've had in the deaf community and the experiences that other members of the deaf community have experienced. And I was pretty blunt in my comments to him about the school being in place since 1880 and talking about what we can do to change things that have been in place since then. And he seemed open and ready for the challenge. And I wanted to share my confidence in Assistant Superintendent Martin. I believe that we as a deaf community need to give him a chance and give him the opportunity to build and earn our trust before we decide that he can't have our trust. The deaf community needs to give him a chance to see what he does. Let's see what he makes use of with his background and his knowledge in order to successfully transform ASDB as an agency. That's all I'm asking from the community, and now I move to approve Assistant Superintendent Martin's contract.
A second.
All in favor?
Linda Moser.
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, we're going to move to 6.04, intent to offer teacher employment contracts pursuant to ARS 384303A1. The board may vote to go into executive session for the purposes of discussion, consideration of employment matters. That one was on the consent agenda, and it is now not. Are there any board members that would like to make a comment? No, there are no board members that would like to make a comment. Okay. I move that we approve the contract slated in item 6.04. Is there a second?
This is UK, I second.
All in favor say aye.
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 Are there any opposed?
This is Board Member Jantz. I abstain.
Okay, thank you. All right, that passes. Now we're going to go on to 6.06, action item intent to offer salary increase to Superintendent Reichman pursuant to ARS 384303A1. The board may vote to go into executive session for the purposes of discussion and consideration of employment matters. Here, we heard earlier today and via email earlier in the week that the legislature approved a 10% increase for all full-time and part-time employees of the agency. That's fantastic news. That's going to help us compete better in the market, to able to recruit and retain highly qualified staff, teachers, staff, leadership, other services, other job classifications. That will help us, again, I think that will really help us, the agency, in getting highly qualified folks into the agency. When I met with Superintendent Reichman to go over the draft agenda, I asked her if it would include her, and she said she wasn't sure. So we looked into it, and there's at least some doubt as to whether or not the legislature action included her based on her contract. We looked at it quite carefully. So, from my perspective, I think that Superintendent Reichman should join in that 10% increase. I wouldn't want to leave her, at least in my opinion, wouldn't want to leave her out if everyone else was getting a raise. I mean, I'm a firm believer that the leader should eat last, and certainly that's the case here. And I do want to note, this is not something that she brought up or she asked. This is something that I asked about and wanted to make sure that we get right. So again, it's within the board's discretion to offer that increase or not. There is in the executive content of board docs that's available to the board members an addendum that was drawn up by our legal counsel to affect that. Does anyone have any discussion on that?
This is Linda.
Okay.
Yes, I would like to make a comment regarding superintendents across the country and what their pay looks like. I would like to say that I serve on other boards, one based in New York. So what that means is that we just hired a new superintendent, and their pay is commensurate to what Arizona superintendents are receiving. So I'm very happy with that. And I do agree that, that this pay increase is deserved. And I'm happy that a superintendent in Arizona is getting paid what a superintendent in New York City is getting paid. And we are lucky to have Superintendent Reichman here.
Thank you, Linda. Are there any other comments?
This is Board Member Jantz. President Nigro, you mentioned that this was written by the AG. I don't see that in board docs. Am I looking in the wrong spot?
It should be under executive content. I see it in mine right now. If you're logged in, if you're not logged in, you won't be able to see it.
Okay, I would like to review that if I'm given the opportunity.
Do we have that printed out, Letitia?
I have mine.
Okay.
Oh, I'm looking at it on Linda's computer.
Okay.
Thank you. I have had the opportunity to review it. With that salary increase, does that impact the entire executive team as well? Does the board need to make approvals for others, or is this only an approval for the superintendent?
This is only an approval for the superintendent. All the other leadership team would be included by that legislative action. So from what HR tells me, the only full-time or part-time employee that did not receive a 10%, or there's some question as to whether or not she's entitled to that 10% raise, is the superintendent. So because there's some uncertainty about it, this addendum will remove that uncertainty.
Sorry, this is Board Member Jantz again. Just to double check, if confirmed, then ADOA will be increasing the pay. That comes from ADOA, not from the ASDB operating budget. Is that correct?
No, that's from our budget.
This is Assistant Superintendent Kerbler. To clarify, we will receive funding for the agency-wide, statewide salary increase for all full-time and part-time. There is still question as to whether or not, as needed, temporary staff will be eligible to receive the 10% salary increase. However, that funding we will be receiving from the legislature. Of that amount, I'm not quite sure if it's going to fully fund the 10% agency-wide, and that, again, is what I alluded to in my report, that I will need to determine how much of that funding will be covered from the state, and then what will need to be coming from the operating budget to fund that 10% salary increase.
And Superintendent, just to set the context here, as everyone knows on the board, Superintendent Reichman's new contract just began on the 1st of this month. So this raise would continue for the next 3 years minus about a week.
This is Board Member Jantz. I believe I can say with confidence that I don't think Superintendent Reichman would be happy if the agency had to incur that cost for her increase. Assistant Superintendent Cooper, are you able to find out what the exact amount is that we will be getting from the legislature for salary increases?
Yes, I clarified that we will not receive final amounts on the operating budget until the latter part of July, early August, when we receive our final appropriations report. I can provide more information in the September 8th meeting. However, I do want to clarify, it is my understanding all state agencies are to be funded for the statewide salary increase, and in this matter, as it pertains to Superintendent Reichman, that would include her adjustment to also be funded from the state legislature as well.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments from the board?
This is Suke. I move to approve.
Second. All in favor to approve the addendum as proposed? Say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And any abstentions?
This is Board Member Jantz. I abstain.
Okay, thank you. All right, that passes. And the next 6.07, information discussion item, compensation restructure, Anita Pyatt, Executive Director of Human Resources.
Good afternoon, Board President Nigro, members of the board, Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendent Cooper, and Assistant Superintendent Martin. In your board packet is a copy of a board summary on ASDB's compensation architecture project. The ASDB compensation architecture project, also referred to as ACAP, is ASDB's 2 to 3 year plan in addressing the agency's compensation and classification structure. This project entails reviewing and analyzing position classifications, our grading system, salary schedules, years of service, minimum wage increases, and scheduled reviews for market analysis. We completed a market analysis for all positions in 2019, which took us about 3 years to do that. In the first phase, we focused on addressing the compression in the classified salary schedule, which was compounded by the minimum wage increases over the last several years. We regraded all positions on the classified salary schedule ranging from 1 to 22. Also, we want to ensure that the updated classified salary schedule structure supports any future adjustments for minimum wage increases. We've identified position classifications in grades 1 through 9 and are addressing the salary compression by aligning entry-level rates with market studies and giving increases to current ASDB staff members based on the years of service with ASDB. These positions include administrative support, instructional assistant, technical aid, residential, security, transportation, and entry-level support for business services, human resources, and facilities. The salary adjustment will impact a little over 200 staff members and will range between anywhere from 0 to 5%, depending on a staff member's years of service with ASDB. So to summarize, for this fiscal year, the following will be implemented. All staff members, as we know, will receive a 10% increase to their base pay effective July 9th, 2022. Staff members in grades 1 through 9 on the classified salary schedule will receive anywhere from 0 to 5% based on their years of service, which will take effect July 24th of 2022. Teachers will be granted an additional step on the teacher salary schedule, which will also take effect on July 24th of 2022. In the next 2 years, we will be addressing grades 10 through 22 on the classification salary schedule, as well as other salary schedules to address a more holistic approach to our compensation structure that creates a consistency of application among the salary schedules. Our overall salary schedule analysis and restructure is to ensure grades align with the market salary benchmarks, levels of responsibility, placement decisions assessed by education and experience, with the maximum placement defined. This means that staff members will not be compensated over the maximum of the grade in the salary schedule and will be redlined in 2024. And finally, adding a planned schedule of market benchmark reviews to cycle through all positions every 3 years. There may be occasions where in-range adjustments are warranted to resolve compression issues, to align with external markets in highly competitive situations, or to resolve pay equity issues. At this time, I'd like to make myself available for any questions that you may have.
Are there any questions? Okay.
I have one.
Go ahead.
This is Board Member Jantz. Sorry, President Nigro. This all looks great. My only question for you is, are there any thoughts or opportunities or potential discussion on how we can assist instructional assistants to get them scaffolded to become future instructors?
Yes. With the changes that we're making currently in the classified schedule, we are creating a career ladder for instructional assistants to move into other positions with also the intent to help assist with teachers. I know we have done that in the past with several instructional assistants on our campuses that have become teachers.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thank you, Ms. Pyatt.
Thank you.
Next up is 701, information discussion item 2021-2022 strategic plan and dashboard. Superintendent Reichman, although I believe Courtney Fritz is going to be presenting this as well.
Yes, hello, this is Superintendent Reichman. I will turn this over to Ms. Courtney Fritz to give you a brief summary overview of the first year report of the strategic plan. And hopefully her audio is better than mine. Courtney?
Hello. Yes, hello. This is Courtney Fritz. Can everyone hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, great. And I will also try to speak slowly because I have a tendency to speak too fast. Good afternoon, Board President Nigro, members of the board, Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendent Cooper, and Assistant Superintendent Martin. It is my pleasure to share with you today an update regarding the ASCB strategic plan. As you recall, the board voted to approve the new strategic plan in May 2021. Therefore, this evening is our first year report of working with and reporting on the various measures within the strategic plan. I have been working with agency leadership and key ASCB staff members in order to compile and report data within the strategic plan for both 2020-2021 as well as 2021-2022 school years. During this time, Erin, Moya, and I have worked extremely close together to ensure that the data reported and the format for the strategic plan could seamlessly be loaded into a dashboard on the ASCB website. I am happy to report that not only do we have a comprehensive 75-page strategic plan document, we also have a very user-friendly, dynamic dashboard. So I really want to tip my hat to Aaron and all of the work that he did to transform the data into a visual representation that is easy to access, easy to navigate, and easy to understand. You should have received an updated copy of the strategic plan in your board materials, as well as a link to the ASCB dashboard. As Linda mentioned, there's a lot, and we're certainly not going to be able to unpack it in this couple of minutes. But there are a few things that I really wanted to pinpoint and highlight for you. Most of the data is reported following the school year calendar. For those items, you will see the data points referenced in school years, such as 20/21 and then 21/22. However, there are some data points that more accurately align to the fiscal year calendar. And therefore, we did not change those and force them to fit in the school year calendar date. For those items, you will see FY21 to represent fiscal year 21. Since we just last week, or this week, wrapped up fiscal year 22, that data is not included in the update that you received. We do anticipate most of those items being completed this month, but there are a few related to finance in the business services department that might not be ready till October. The post-school outcomes, the ECHO data, is also not completed for the 21-22 school year yet. The itinerant program and the campus program do have last year's data included in the update, but they are following the timeline provided and requested by ADD. So the time frame or the window opened in June, and it will close in September. Therefore, the data will be completed no later than that September due date. Also included in your board docs is an overview of the due dates for Pillar 1. We have that information for the other pillars as well. And this is just an example to show the master timeline that we have and that we are following to make sure that each data measure is reported on time. Throughout our work this year, there were some minor changes. You know, the strategic plan was set up with best thinking in mind, but as we started to work with it, there were some minor things that needed to be tweaked. If there were minor edits on the measures, you will see that represented with an asterisk. that says chart revised with the date to indicate when it was changed. There have been some discussions regarding the need to significantly change how some of the data is reported. Up until this point, that's specifically related to the ELP and itinerant program. Our goal is to present this to you this evening, to hear your feedback, and of course determine next steps. But we would like to have any changes for the 2022-2023 school year done sooner rather than later, so that the directors, the principals know what that data collection looks like for the entire year. In your board docs was a supplemental report for the ELP program. They are part of a new program and therefore wanted to provide a full comprehensive picture of their work this year versus just sticking with what was in the strategic plan. Jay Johnson has also worked on a draft proposal for the itinerant program, which will include reporting IEP goal attainment data versus the state assessment data that has been a challenge to gather from the individual school districts and ADE for their district students. As I mentioned, our goal is to really fine-tune the data reporting within the strategic plan so that it accurately reflects the work the programs are doing while also staying true to the format and consistency of the strategic plan. This evening, we are really looking forward to hearing from you, the board, in regards to what has been done thus far and the information that's been reported to you. And so at this time, I will open it up for any questions or comments you might have.
Are there any questions for Courtney?
Yes, this is Linda. Hi, Courtney, and board members as well. I do want to reiterate what I said at the beginning. I didn't realize that I should have made that comment later on in the agenda. I went into a sprint rather than a slow walk. That's what I tend to do. So I do want to reiterate what I mentioned earlier in the meeting. I do think that it would be valuable to us as a board to have some more in-depth conversation about this. It was our responsibility to develop this plan. It took us a year or longer, and we have been very hopeful that it would work. And so I really want to, I know that so many people have worked very hard on collecting this data and working in the strategic plan. You did mention, Courtney, that there are some specific deadlines and due dates that you're working within, and I would really love to have time to hear more from specific departments that are collecting and using this data so that we become more familiar with it. And again, being our responsibility as the board to create that strategic plan, I would love to see whether it's operating effectively. So I would like to ask President Nigro if we could create a work study session in the fall to have some more time to sit with the strategic plan report.
Thank you, Linda. We're going to be talking about upcoming work study sessions later in the meeting, so we can take that up there.
And I sprinted again. I did it again.
Are there any other questions? I had a couple of questions, and this is really more for Superintendent Reichman. 2.23A and B, it looks like in ELA and math, we had a decrease over last year, and wanted to know, what we're thinking about, what we need to do. I mean, that's part of the reason why we have the strategic plans, so that we don't know where the problems are if we don't collect any data. So we did that, and here we are with year-over-year data, and now we can see where we need to focus our efforts. So obviously that's one of a few others here. And again, Superintendent Reichman, you don't have to speak to that right now, but I mean, to me, that's one of the areas where we need to focus our efforts to improve for next year. I also would include, well, go ahead if you have any responses to that, Superintendent.
Yes, this is Superintendent Reichman. We are well aware of the ELA, English Language Arts, and math scores, and we do need a renewed focus on that, which is part of getting back to school improvement. And this will be one of the priorities that Assistant Superintendent Martin will be focusing on for the next year and beyond.
Thank you, Superintendent. Also, maybe this is for Courtney, 2.24A, the itinerant data seems to be unavailable. Is that because we don't have good data sharing agreements with some of the co-ops, or is that for some other reason?
This is Courtney. Yeah, the short answer, I would say yes. Jay Johnson, as well as other agency leaders, have tried to figure out the best approach in gathering that data. ADE has given different answers at different times, but I believe it kind of all goes back to the itinerant program and the services they provide. They are not the teacher of record assessing the students with the state assessment. They are the provider for the IEP goals as written in the IEP. And so, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well, no, you can go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to say that the itinerant program has not been successful in getting the data directly from ADE. The other discussion has been getting the data from the individual school districts, and that has also not been successful.
Right.
And if we thought it could be gathered that way, there's discussion of would it accurately reflect or measure the work that the itinerant program is doing? And so that's why at this point, Jay Johnson and his team have worked to propose looking at the IEP goal attainment data versus state assessment data. Not meaning they're not going to look at it at all, but if it's not readily available, do we have other data that is readily available that we can use now to monitor and measure and look at the effectiveness of the program?
Thank you, Courtney. I remember at one point we did, and again, the AZ merits evolved, but several years ago we did get AZ merit data from the co-ops, and also when we were having our LEA, not LEA discussions recently, one of the pro LEA factors was that we would own the data for the brick and mortar students, but that was mitigated. I remember Dr. Rex telling us that we could amend the IGAs pretty easily to be able to get access to that data, and you're 100% right, we don't own it. The individual LEAs that we work with own it. But if we ask nicely, hopefully they can give it to us in most places, because I would like to see that data in the itinerant. Again, we saw it several years ago on AZ merit scores, and that helps us give a picture of who we're serving in the itinerants. You're right. The instruction, the core academic instruction is being done by the LAs in those cases, and not by our employees. But we still want to see how those students are doing. So I think that would be important for us if we don't have it in the IGAs, that we amend them to get it, so that we get a better picture of who we're serving. And again, the co-ops are serving around 2,000 students a year, so it's a large cohort of children that we need to be monitoring.
Yes, and I will say that although it's not the state assessment data, we were successful in getting the PSO data for the itinerant students. So that is something, a positive, that we're, at least making some headway and are able to have that data at this time.
Sure. Thank you. And Superintendent Reichman, 4.2, the facilities plan, I know we had that as part of our strategic plan. It got delayed a bit for various reasons in the last year. As we mentioned earlier in the meeting, it's going to become much more of a priority the second half of this year, getting that together in response to what the Auditor General's findings are likely going to be. So I want to make sure that we are on track. Again, a little bit later in the meeting, we're going to discuss work study sessions related to that, but I want to make sure that we're, responding to that appropriately. So next year we're not seeing it. We see some significant progress in the next year in 4.2. Also on 4.4, that's the cost per student. I don't see preschool included. We probably should include that. We have in our other previous finance reports, so I think that needs to be added back, along with a weighted student number if we can. The weighted student number is in, it's a couple of data points above that, but if we add it, I think it would be easier to add it to this one so that, just like we can on the more detailed report that Ms. Cooper gives us, we can multiply the cost per student by the weighted student number and get to the total programmatic budget.
President Nigro.
Yes.
I have a question for clarification. This is Linda. We had a little bit of a hard time hearing, so can you go back to the school, started with a W, I think. The interpreters didn't catch it. Waits school?
The weighted student number?
The weighted student number?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Right, if we can add the weighted student number. It's in the strategic plan, it's just not also in that, in the 4.4.4. I think it'd just be easier to read if it were in there as well.
I see.
So it's easy to check. You can multiply quickly. These are my weighted students, this is my cost per student, and then I get back to the total programmatic budget. It's similar to the other reports that Ms. Cooper has given us. And then 4.4.
Excuse me, President Nigro,
Sure.
I apologize. I think you're bringing up some really good points and some great questions that I am very interested in knowing more about, and I think you're sort of giving me more reasons to want to sit down and have a longer work study session and look at a lot of these numbers in this data that is so important. I don't fully understand the struggle with getting that state data. That seems, I wonder why that ADE has made that so difficult and hasn't responded or has responded with different answers. So we are under the Department of Education, correct? So I'm just struggling to understand why we wouldn't be able to get that data.
So that's not correct. We're not an arm of the Department of Education.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay,
Okay.
so then that leads me to my next question. Then why should we follow ADE regulations if we're not under them? So now I have more to say.
This is Sukay. I don't know if I'm.
Are you on?
Hold on. This is Sukay. I think one of the points of clarification is the information that we are able to collect on the campuses as opposed to information that we can collect via the co-ops. Because the co-op students belong to their individualized districts, those districts are the owners of that information, and I think that is where we find it challenging to be able to collect comprehensive and accurate data on those students because they are not technically considered ours.
Okay, I understand. Thank you, Susan.
This is Board Member Jantz. Is it possible to have separate agreements, have separate IGAs, to have a contract amendment? If school districts decide to do that, could we include language about information sharing? That way we can get that information more easily through a contract agreement through the co-op services?
PV, this is David. I believe that it is when we update these IGAs periodically, and we have, I don't know, a couple hundred maybe, or or so. And that was one of the things that we were going to do were we not to proceed with, were we not to have LEA status. We would have lost all the data related to the students that attend the brick and mortar schools, and that would have made it much harder to track their progress. But the idea would be that we would include that in the IGA agreements. Again, they're updated periodically. Could they be updated via an addendum all at once? That really depends on, a school district by school district case. I would like to do that, or I'd like to see if that can be done, so that we can get access to that data and we can better track the students that we serve in the itinerant program. But again, as Suke mentioned, that student data is the school district's, and it's not ours, so they could technically say no if they wanted to.
I agree, and if the IGAs make it difficult to get the information, then maybe we could consider putting language in the itinerant contract. So when they agree to our itinerant services, they're also agreeing as part of the contract to share data on the students who are providing those services to.
Correct. That is what the IGAs are. They're intergovernmental agreements between the school district and the agency to provide those services. So we should be able to include terms like that in the future.
Great.
And then one more just small item, 4.4.6. It looks like there hasn't been any progress there. We probably want to make some progress for next year. Are there any other questions about the strategic plan report? The dashboard looks great, by the way. If anyone has seen the website, it looks great. I'm viewing the PDF as well, but that's just an excellent job on that. I know it took a long time to put that together. I know we've seen kind of the beta version of that in the past, but it looks pretty good. It's accessible to the public. This is really this is really great to see a year out from where we began.
And this is Board Member Jantz. Thank you, President Nigro. You stole my thunder there. I appreciate that comment. Thank you. And two other things that I wanted to mention. We need to be aware that we need to be careful with some of the data. COVID may have impacted some of those data points, and so we need to be aware of that, and we can't use that as the end-all be-all. COVID, unfortunately, significantly impacted deaf education and deaf education services, so that's something that we need to keep in mind as far as future analysis goes. The second point that I wanted to make with the ELA and the improvement that we've seen, we have been, as an agency, working toward this LEA status. And now that we know that we are a bilingual, bicultural school, we need to focus on English and ASL, and we need to formalize that instruction. We have been doing formal English instruction, and I think that this is a good time to start down the path of recognizing that we need to create a strategic plan for formal ASL instruction to help those deaf and hard of hearing students improve their sign skills and give them that language foundation. That first language foundation will help them focus on their second language acquisition. And they can't be formally taught English but only have social ASL. I think it's so important for students to have formal ASL instruction as well. What are we doing to make sure that we have formal ASL instruction for the students? If there is nothing, I believe we need to address that gap to ensure that we are providing those campus staff the opportunity to pull in ASL specialists to provide that instruction.
Superintendent Reichman, can you respond to that?
Yes, this is Superintendent Reichman. Right, up until this point, we've been focusing on establishing the basic curriculum. If you recall, we started with the English language arts curriculum, English, the first year. I believe that was in 2017, 2018. The next year, we established the math curriculum. The year after that, the science curriculum, and then the year after that, the social studies. We then got caught up with the COVID pandemic, the shutdown of the schools. So we have not yet really gone back to the beginning to revisit the ELA curriculum. We have been working on what's called the BGC, the Bilingual Grammar Curriculum, that uses American Sign Language as a first language, to teach that as a language, and to use it to scaffold English as a second language. Some of our teachers on the two campuses in the elementary schools are using the BGC on top of the National Geographic English curriculum. Not all of them are doing that. So what Mrs. Dance is suggesting is something that we are working towards. It's not where we are at today. Within the next year or so, we need to start revisiting the entire curriculum model that we have and start from the beginning. The good news is we've been 5 years into implementing the different curriculums, whereas previously the schools didn't have formal curriculum, at least for a time. Now we have formal curriculum in all the subject areas. So with the new Assistant Superintendent Martin, you will have the opportunity to review and to see where we're at, and then how do we move forward. We also have in-house experts within the Organizational Development Division with Mr. Oren Katkoff and his team of the education specialists that have been working on developing materials and training related to BGC, the Bilingual Grammar Curriculum, and that I'm speaking of specifically Tina Sarter, Rose Andrea Cola, and in new addition, Michael Olivier. So we have the pieces in place now. It's just putting them all together. And those are the next steps for the agency.
Thank you, Superintendent.
Thank you, Superintendent. I appreciate your comments, and I agree with you. I think that that is a good challenge for Assistant Superintendent Martin to address as well. I want to mention how critical it is that we have the experts who can provide ASL assessment to identify language gaps and to also identify how we can scaffold their ASL language to assist them with the bridging of the English language. And as a board, we should provide the same level of support to the LSL students. And so when I think about the PDSD campus, there are 2 ASL specialists there, and we need more. We need them to be an important part of the IEP team, especially when working with the youth at that critical language window. It's so important that children have the opportunity to have that exposure and to have more than just access to 2 ASL specialists on a campus. In theory, we should be able to provide ASL specialist services for the itinerant students as well if the IEP team would agree that that service would be necessary. So what is the plan to expand the ASL specialist positions? Because I would like to see that number increase.
As of today, we do not have a specific plan to increase the number of American Sign Language Excellent. That said, like I said, we do have the pieces within the agency today that we didn't have 5 years ago. So it's a matter of putting those pieces together, determining what the gaps are, and what resources would need to be reallocated to fill in those gaps. We are just on the front end of doing that.
Thank you, Superintendent Reichman. Are there any other questions or comments on this item? Okay, seeing none, we're going to go to 702, information and discussion item, legislative update. Maria Murphy, Director of Policy and Government Relations.
Good evening, board members. You have before you the abstract that I wrote providing a summary of the Arizona State Legislative Session. Assistant Superintendent Cooper covered most of the major takeaways for ASDB, so I do not believe that I need to gild the lily any further. At this time, I would just like to make myself available for any questions regarding this year's legislative session.
Are there any questions? PV?
Yes, this is Board Member Jantz. Ms. Murphy, I really appreciate your work and your effort during the legislative session. I was a little bit disappointed to find out that the allocation for transportation costs were a one-time allocation. Do you have any idea or insight into why that was a one-time allocation rather than being a recurring funding source? Was there a reason given?
There was no specific reason given to me, Board Member Jantz. From what I understand, the request that we made was a rather large request. It was almost kind of like a moonshot. To put it in perspective, we asked for around $2 million in recurring funding when we were looking at hiring 20 additional teachers for the early learning program versus $4.2 million recurring for transportation this year. So I believe that they wanted to do something to help us, but I think that $4.2 million recurring was a pretty big ask. And I think that this year we are going to be probably much more precise in what we're asking for with our decision package to OSPB, and we will come back again next year to ask for additional funding. You probably don't recall, but the first time that we asked for the funding for the 20 additional teachers, we were shot down. But we came back the next year and we got it. So we just need to make sure that we are being pleasantly persistent, and I feel confident that we should be able to get something in the future. But yes, I understand it was a disappointment. I was disappointed too.
Great, thank you. Does that include the mileage reimbursement request, or is that a different request?
House Bill 2566 was basically drafted in such a way that it looked at doing a per route mile, and it also included increasing our capital outlay by tying it to something additional, tying it to something similar to district additional assistance. The one-time funding that we were given is a line item that just says additional transportation assistance for increase in student counts. So that I believe that so long as we use that funding for transportation, we can decide where we would like to specifically direct that funding, for what purposes.
Great, thank you. Yeah, hopefully next year we can try again with that request for the mileage rate increase, and hopefully we get that approved at some time in the future.
Yes.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Ms. Murphy on this? Okay, seeing none, we're going to go to 7.03, information item, introduction and possible discussion of policies GBEC, GBECA, EEA, EEAA, and GBPD. Marie Murphy, Director of Policy and Government Relations.
Good evening again. So you have before you the red lines of the above titled policies. The policies were posted to the public for review. I have not received any comments regarding the policies from the public. However, I would like to note that Board President Nigro reached out to me with some questions in regard specifically to policy GBPD. This is the new policy that was intended to eliminate the three policies which were felt to be redundant and to combine it into one new policy. With those questions that he had specifically in regards to medical marijuana and wanting to add in potentially some things from the policies that were eliminated, we are continuing to work with our Assistant Attorney General on fixing some of the language in this proposed policy. So I want to let everybody know that when this comes back for a second read, this is going to be looking different than what it is looking like now, simply because we want to make sure that when we are doing drug testing of our employees, that we are covering all of our bases and taking a 360-degree view on that.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy. And I just want to elaborate on that. I mean, some of the policies, you see that several of them were just wholly eliminated, and then there's this new proposed unified one. But there's some holes in it that we need to fix. I mean, one of them is, under the influence of alcohol and under the influence of drugs are defined in the policy, but they're not used anywhere in the policy. Importantly, there's no prohibition of an employee reporting for duty under the influence of alcohol or drugs. There's just a prohibition of them making, using, manufacturing those drugs while on duty, while on campus. So we need to certainly fix that hole. The existing policy does account for the medical cannabis law that Arizona has. Does not account for the recreational cannabis that was just passed a couple of years ago, and we're going to need to account for that. So we'll need to. Again, medical cannabis users have certain labor and employment protections that we need the policy to reflect. As for recreational users, that's a stickier issue. My understanding is that we can treat recreational cannabis use just like other illegal drug use. So if there's a test that shows a metabolite of cannabis, that would be the same as a positive test of another illegal drug. Or we can treat it more like alcohol, where you can't be under the influence, again, after the policy is updated, you can't be under the influence of alcohol at work or on duty or around children, or while on premises. But we wouldn't, take adverse action if there was a metabolite found from consumption that was off duty and not on children and not on premises, et cetera. And I really want to see, and so that the board can have some input on that. I really want to see what ASBA says, if there's a best practice out there that they've published, what they think. I want to see what the board thinks on that, because that's something that we'll have to wrestle with this policy. Whereas on the medical side, I think we have to mirror what the medical cannabis law says about, what the certain protections are. And again, I think that's limited to intoxication. You can't be intoxicated at work, and you can't have intoxicating metabolites in your system while on duty. But if there were metabolites found, we may be prevented in some circumstances from taking adverse action. The other part of it is we want to make sure that we're covering abuse of OTC drugs as well, that they can be abused, abuse of prescription drugs. And even there are some prescription drugs that are taken as needed to treat a medical problem under the supervision of a qualified practitioner, and they still might impair certain, the operation of heavy machinery or driving or other things like that. So we need to make sure that we account for all of those things in this policy. And at the same time, we need to make sure that if there is an employee that has a substance abuse problem, that we support them and they're getting help and treatment for that. That's in the proposed policy, but again, just to reiterate that we are supportive of employees that have a problem and that seek treatment and seek help to remediate it. Are there any other questions about that?
Yes. This is Board Member Jantz. I have two things. Is there any consideration or referral to ADOA policy on this topic? They do have some very specific procedures as a supervisor, I have to follow, and we have to make sure that our policies are in alignment with ADOA as well.
So in answer to that question, Board Member Jantz, ASDB is not considered a System A agency, and because we're not a System A agency, we're not held to ADOA's personnel rules. Now, we can certainly, if there are policies or procedures that we think would be helpful, that could be of use to us in general application, we certainly can adopt some of those policies and practices, but as a general rule, we're not required. We're a little bit different.
Okay, thank you for that information. I appreciate that. I do think it would be worth taking a look at the ADOA policy just in case there's something that they have that we think is great. We wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. We could use it or borrow it and modify it to include certain things like medical cannabis. If they have something that's tested and it's worked, then we definitely don't need to reinvent the wheel. Now, as I'm looking through the policy, I don't see anything about the EAP, the Employee Assistance Program, or any supplementary resources or services to provide support. I think it would be important to include that in policy and procedure. That way staff is aware that the EAP is available to them, and supervisors should also be recommending the use of EAP as much as possible.
I know that Human Resources does an excellent job of publicizing EAP services. What I would say is that if we want to include information about EAP services, that would be something that would probably be a little bit better suited to a regulation. So I'm certainly open to that. So I understand that we need to do a little bit more work on this particular policy, and yes.
Thank you.
This is Suke. I am really just in support, and I second what Board Member Jantz said. I think there are some ADOA policies that would lend themselves very well, whether or not ASDB is a System A agency. And I would say that the alcohol and drug policy would be one of those.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Ms. Murphy? Okay, thank you, Ms. Murphy. Next up is 704. This was on the consent agenda, item approval of policies GCD and GCCH. Marie Murphy, Director of Policy and Government Relations. This was on the consent agenda item, and now it is not.
So these particular policies cover situations for individual ASDB staff members. GCCH covers bereavement leave, and the main difference that is being proposed with that particular policy is that staff members will now be expected to require some kind of supporting documentation by submitting a copy of an obituary, a prayer card, copy of a death certificate, basically just to verify that there was actually a death in the family. And then GCD discusses annual leave and holidays, and the main difference in that we're proposing is that a non-exempt employee will be compensated hour for hour of additional pay at the current hourly rate, and working on a holiday has to be approved by the superintendent or the designee.
Vivi, go ahead.
Thank you, President Nigro. What prompted the revision of this policy? How did this come up?
This policy was revised at the request of Human Resources. And Director Pyatt would like to go ahead and offer you a little bit of additional information on why.
Anita Pyatt here. Are you referring to both policies or one in particular?
Both policies?
Okay, so for the bereavement leave, historically our policy has always stated that you could only have one a year. And so with the COVID pandemic, there were situations where employees were, losing family members in multiple situations. And so it was a hardship. And so that's why we updated that policy.
And what was the reason for the second policy?
So for the second policy, for the holiday leave, we wanted to address that staff members, if they were going to work on a holiday, it had to be approved, meaning those were essential functions that needed to be carried out over a holiday. And so that's why that was changed.
Great. Thank you. For that first one, some of the questions that I had were answered by the answer that I got. I didn't realize that we weren't under ADOA. It does make sense now, now that I know that. Are there any opportunities, or were there any opportunities to compare this policy to ADOA's policy? For example, ADOA says that if you have any out-of-state travel, it is a mandatory 5-day bereavement. Something like this should be at an individual discretion. If something occurs, then it would be a 3-day bereavement. If something else occurs, then it would be a 5-day bereavement, for example.
Yes, we did review ADOA's policies. And so I believe ours mimics theirs, where it's 3 days for in-state and then 5 days for out-of-state or longer travel time.
Right, but in here it says may approve, and I do have some concern that if a person is out of state, if there's an out-of-state death and the person puts in the request and it is denied, I don't think that would be fair or reasonable. I think that there should be certain language in here for out-of-state travel. Just making that known to the board.
It's certainly possible that we can pass this policy and then ask for another one to account for that to come back next time.
And I guess I would say that because it says may approve, we wouldn't want someone to think automatically based off where the funeral is at. Obviously, out of state would be 5 days. But if there's an exceptional long travel time, let's say somebody lives in Tucson and they're traveling to the Four Corners, that they may not be going out of state. It may be still in Arizona, but that's a far distance to travel for that funeral.
Exactly, and that's why I think that it should be more clearly delineated. That way it's not at the discretion of an individual. If it's, let's say, more than a 4-hour drive, hypothetically, then that would make more sense. If it's out of state, that makes sense. I don't want it to be a decision that's made at a lower level and not have it be equitable. I want everyone to have the same benefit from the policy.
So for the extended leave, for bereavement leave, that would be required to be approved by the superintendent and/or the designee.
But again, in here it says may. And so I know that the ADOA regulations say, or policy says, that if it's an out-of-state death, they automatically are given 5 days of bereavement to keep things equitable. And I think that in here, we might want to say, testing? Okay.
Yep, there we
All
go.
right. Okay, so for example, this is only a hypothetical. If it is if someone is going to a funeral that's 4 hours away, then they would be given 2 days. That way, it's more clearly defined in the policy.
So just to clarify, what you're recommending is to put in there that the approval of additional days would be for 4 hours or more? Is that what you're recommending?
I think it could go one of either ways. If an employee has an out-of-state death, I think that they should automatically be given 5 days, which would be in compliance with the ADOA policy that's already in place. And secondly, this is another option. If someone had to go somewhere, and let's say it was at least 4 hours or further away, then they would automatically be given those 5 days. I'm working with hypothetical numbers here, and I think that's something that could be worked on, but the term may in there does make me nervous. I think that there should be certain parameters that if A, then B, or if C, then D, someone is given 3 days or 5 days.
Okay, it has been another hour and 15 minutes, so we do need to take a break for the interpreters. So let's hold that thought and come back at 6:57. Okay, everyone, it is 6:57. We are at 7:04, approval of policies. So I know that there's been some discussion of potential amendments to this. One option is just not to pass policies right now and have them come back next time in September. The other time is to pass one, well, right, we can pass one or both, and then have another amendment come up at the next meeting. It's really up to the board.
This is Board Member Jantz. President Nigro, I move that we approve both of the policies with the understanding that we would like to have the opportunity for continued revision on bereavement leave, and that's something that we'll talk about, get updated language at the next board meeting.
Can we pass a policy that we're not accepting?
No, we can pass the policy, and then there'll be further revisions.
Okay, gotcha. All right, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
the other part is not really part of the motion. It's just we're going to pass it. So I'm just saying we're going to, the motion to clarify is to pass the policies, but the staff understands that further revision is likely going to be warranted or at least explored at the next meeting.
This is Suke. I second that motion.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? No, and then we're going to go on to 7:05, information discussion item on ombudsperson position, Superintendent Reichman.
Hello, this is Superintendent Reichman. I will keep this brief. I just wanted to share with you, the Board of Directors, that we have just hired a new ombudsperson for ASTB. This person is Miss Donna Williams. You have her bio in the board docs agenda. Please take a few minutes to take a look at that. She is a practicing attorney that focuses on conflict resolution outside of the courtroom. She has expertise in mediation. She works with individuals, organizations, and small businesses to resolve conflicts using specific mediation techniques. She happens to be an instructor with the University of Phoenix. She teaches courses on criminal justice, effective communication, and mediation. She also works with the Arizona Department of Education. She works with parents who have children with disabilities who are disagreeing with school officials on IDEA requirements and services being provided to those children in public schools. She serves as a mediator in those situations to resolve those conflicts. So she has considerable special education expertise. She has a bachelor's degree in sociology from the University of California in San Diego. Her law degree is from the University of California, Davis. She is licensed to practice as an attorney in Nevada, Maryland, and in Arizona. She will begin her work with us next week, Monday, July 11th. I will be sending out an email to the agency showing information about Ms. Williams to the agency and to the community, as well as contact information and how to reach out to her if questions come up that staff would like someone to speak with. as well as other stakeholders, including the community. And that's what I wanted to share with you this evening. No action required, just for your information.
Thank you, Superintendent. Are there any questions for the Superintendent?
This is Linda. I just have a couple of things that I'm wondering about, and I may have overlooked this from previous conversations. I think that this came up a couple meetings ago, and a lot of that information has left my mind. I'm wondering about the frequency of work. What do you have in mind, or what is the agreement with Ms. Williams? And what would her compensation look like? How has that been arranged? Just as a board member, I would like to know that information, and please do forgive me if this is something we talked about and I just forgot. There was a lot going on in those previous meetings.
All right. Ms. Williams is working part-time. She can work up to 19 hours a week. We are not providing benefits. We are giving her a direct hourly rate. I cannot share that information in this public forum, but I am happy to share that information in an email to the board.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Are there any other questions? Okay, seeing none, we're going to go to 7.07, approval of minutes of the regular board meeting of May 5th, 2022, the special board meeting of May 25th, 2022, and the Finance Committee meeting of April 28th, 2022. This was on the consent agenda, and now it is not. Okay, if there are no comments, I move that we...
This is Board Member Jans.
Sure.
Thank you, President Nigro. I was just trying to get that document pulled up. Appreciate your patience. I'm looking through the meeting minutes, and I noticed that there was one objection that was noted in the minutes. Many of my other objections on specific policy and issues were not included in the minutes. I do think that is an important thing that we need to include for the record. I would like, because I made comments when I made my objections, and I think it's also important to include some of that negative language that was used.
Is there negative language in particular that you are would like to see in there?
Yes, I can give you an example. Terms like being ridiculous, terms like being called an asshole, things like that. I think that's important.
I'm sorry, I don't recall that ever being said by anyone at the meeting.
It is on the record, and it is on a recording, so it is there, and I was able to view that.
And who, okay.
I watched it afterwards because I was unable to, and it is on the recording.
Okay.
I'm not sure by whom, but it is on the recording.
I'd like to go back and take a look at that. In terms of the specific, points, I think we can update that, and we can go back and look at the recording if there's anything in particular I'd like to have on there. For the other ones, we can move to accept the other minutes.
Okay. So I move to accept minutes for April 28th and May 5th.
Okay. All in...
Seconded.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? No. Okay. 808, call to the public. Call to the public on non-agendized items. We have two that were submitted, and Suke will summarize.
They're actually very different. The first non-agenda item was submitted by Marcus Titus in regard to the assistant superintendent. So the overall concern is that the changing environment of ASDB as far as the number of students dramatically dropping here on the campus and in the residential programs, and the concern of how to either increase those numbers or make this a viable campus again. And their concern of wanting to see this be a place like it was when they were in school here. And the second is a comment from Samantha Moore, and the subject line reads, "Board President needs to go," and it just, in summary, it is saying that President Nigro is oppressive and has discriminated against the deaf. He did not listen or handle board meetings effectively with deaf board members, and this is how he acts towards the agency that will impact the campus as a whole.
Thank you. And then we go to 8.02, discussion of possible action item, agenda items for the next regular board meeting scheduled for September 8th in Tucson, and proposed work study on the master facility plan. So here, sorry, it's been a 3-hour meeting.
This is Linda?
Yeah.
Or did
Well, I was just going to introduce the item. So we have potential agenda items for September. And then in Tucson, it looks like October 20th, we did a doodle poll before the meeting. Looks like October 20th is going to be the date for the master facility plan work study session, as I mentioned. The master facility plan is going to be a big push for the second half of the year and going forward. It was the one to find, where it is likely going to be the one finding from the Auditor General is that we have to address the facilities. And again, when we get that report in October, we'll see in great detail, and the board will get a draft of that in advance. The agency, to my knowledge, has not gotten a draft yet. We only had those oral summary of preliminary findings. So there'll be a draft, and those are a whole process before we get to final. But that final should happen in October, so we'll have some weeks to review it or some days to review it in detail. But again, that's going to be an important thing, is to take a look at our facilities plan and try to move forward.
President Nigro, this is Suke. This is something we have brought up kind of here and there in board meetings in the past, and I know that Superintendent Reichman has held town hall meetings for community stakeholders. I would like to touch on that again, and again suggest that that there be board involvement in those. One of the things I think, just based on the comments that have come up in recurrent meetings, I think one of the things that we need to address in a town hall kind of forum is sort of the evolution of ASDB. I think a lot of the concerns and comments that have been brought to the attention of the board based on how ASDB used to be and how vibrant it used to be as a campus, I think the community needs to understand the responsibility of ASDB under IDEA, as opposed to how it might have run prior to IDEA and Public Law 94-142. Understanding this as being a least restrictive environment and how that needs to be identified before students can be here, I think is some of why we see some of the comments that we keep getting. So I think if we could address that possibly in a town hall where Superintendent Reichman kind of does an evolution and possibly have board there to hear community concerns and even ideas and suggestions for how we should move forward.
I second that.
And I'm in support of that as well. This is Linda. I support that very much.
I would support that as well.
Okay. And then, Linda, I think earlier in the meeting you had mentioned you wanted to have, perhaps a small work study on the strategic plan. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. If the board would like to do that, we can.
I don't know that I would call it small, but I would like to have a work study.
Sure. We can do the doodle poll again. I'm not sure when the timing of that will be. It would probably be in late November or early December, based on our current schedule. But we can do that and then set the date via the doodle poll like we normally do.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
All right.
President Nigro. I do
Thank
actually
you.
have one more thing that a couple of things that I would like to mention.
Sure.
I'm not sure if this would necessarily require any action, but at least for some discussion, I've not always known whether something should be an agenda item or something should be a work study item, but there is something that I've discussed with Superintendent Reichman. So when it comes to a policy, establishing a new policy or changing an existing policy, if I recall, and if this is a memory that has stayed with me from when I first joined the board, my very first year on the board, there was a policy committee. And I do remember sitting on that policy committee once, wanting to learn about that, and I sat with a couple of board members here who are here, present currently in this meeting. And what I'm wondering is, does that policy committee still exist, or where are we at with that? So I would like to see that policy committee continue to function. I do think that, like with our finance committee and having a policy committee to have more in-depth conversations and be able to bring back information and recommendations to the full board, I think that would help us run more efficiently and effectively and stick to more efficient timelines. And so that's something that I wanted to suggest, resurrecting that policy committee meeting or policy committee if it doesn't currently exist. And if we could, then I would like to stay on that and have a couple other board members join me. I'm not sure what needs to happen in order for that to occur, President Nigro.
Sure. So we can agendize that for for the next meeting. But the short answer is, a number of years ago, someone who's not the former president of the board, who is not on the board right now, kind of in a meeting just said, "Okay, we'll have a policy committee, and you two are on it." And that was that's what he said. As we looked at it later, there is a policy that says that the special president-formed committees should be for a special purpose and should be ad hoc and for a limited time and have a set end date. And that the only standing committee is the finance committee. So to continue to have a policy committee, or to have a policy committee, we'll need to update our other policy that says there's a standing committee of finance and then there's a standing committee of a policy committee. So we can do it if the board wants to do it, but we have to change, and I don't know the letters of the policy offhand, but we do need to change that to make a policy committee as a standing committee that doesn't have an end date and isn't for a specific purpose.
Just also for a point of clarification, that as David said, it was sort of just voluntold previously, but there are a couple of us that do do read-throughs and ask questions and provide comments and feedback to Maria Murphy when she is doing red lines. So and I'm one of those people. So I don't know if that is what you are meaning, or if you are looking to have a specific committee that meets on a regular basis to discuss the policies, or to just discuss the changes that the HR team and Maria Murphy are making to policy. So I guess I'm asking for clarification.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I would like to be able to ask more questions and get into the why of certain things and get clarification and have time to have that conversation outside of the regular board meeting. We can bring that information back with 3 committee members. And I think it would be more efficient in terms of time and give us a little bit better balance or more fairness in examining those policies. I think a 3-person committee is sufficient. And, if we are able to express our view and take the time to really talk through it, I think that we would preemptively address a lot of the questions and concerns the board might bring up in a policy conversation at a board meeting, right? And so it gives us an opportunity to have different views shared. So hopefully that makes sense to me.
I appreciate that clarification.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, we can, Superintendent Reichman, if you can make a note to agendize that for the next time, to change the policy and at least talk about it. I add that anything on, this agenda goes up usually a week before, the Friday before meeting. You can always email anyone, any of the staff, if you have any questions. You can email Ms. Murphy about a policy, or anyone, Ms. Cooper, Mr. Martin, Superintendent Reichman. You can always ask them questions about why is this on here, what's the backstory here, what's the context. Help me understand this. Okay, anything else?
Yes, excuse me, President Negro. I do understand what you're saying. We could ask those questions in advance and things like that. And I think that it has a bit of a different feel than 3 people sitting together and really talking through things in that moment. It's a much more organic conversation rather than I send an email and I get an answer and then I send another email. I want to see those different perspectives and I want to get into a dialogue about some of these things. And for myself as a deaf board member, I feel like I really want to have that contact, that eye contact, that physical contact where we can be together in a room and really feed off of each other, learn from each other. I don't want to be isolated and have that siloed kind of information sharing only if the right question is asked at the right time. I think it would make it more collaborative, and so that's why I brought that up. So I have a follow-up comment if that's okay.
Sure, yes.
Okay, thank you. I have discussed that with Superintendent Reichman. I want her view, her input, and I feel like as a board member, it could be a work study. I'm not entirely sure. I know that we've got a lot to do coming up in terms of work studies already. But in terms of the board and the school, the agency, staff as well, and I'm sure Suke is aware. I would like to look into what is called power, privilege, and oppression, plus autism. That, it could be a workshop or a training or that kind of concept. I think it's important for us to sit together and talk about what those things mean: power, privilege, oppression, autism. And I think for the board it is important to sit and listen to that information. And so, I would like to know from the superintendent what her vision is. I know she's had some ideas, some work that she's been doing, and I want that to be on the record. So thank you.
This is Superintendent Reichman. So speaking to power, privilege, and oppression, we don't have formal training specific to that. We are developing and have developed training pertaining to the deaf community, the deaf culture, and American Sign Language that we're beginning to provide to new staff members as they come to ASCD as new employees. Again, we're on the front end of rolling that out. But obviously, when we talk about the deaf community, the deaf culture, and American Sign Language, the topics of power, privilege, and oppression are intermixed into those discussions. And Linda and I have spoken about this before, and one idea that is being presented is some kind of cultural awareness, sensitivity training to the board of directors as a collective. And if this that interests board members individually and collectively, I am certainly open to researching training opportunities and setting those up for members of ASCB Board of Directors.
Thank you. This is Linda. Thank you, Superintendent Reichman. And that is exactly why I brought this up, because now I, as a certified deaf interpreter, and Suke as an interpreter as well, working outside with the community, are finding a lot of discussion about power, privilege, and oppression. And it is a very important topic, and we're having to do a lot of self-assessment and self-reflection. It's making us better, making personally me a better interpreter, and I think that it would be a great thing for board members to dig into. And I think most of the board members on this board are privileged, if we're being honest. And I won't speak to power and other things, but I do think that it's important that we are able to have that conversation so we can ensure that we're showing mutual respect for each other, and that we are a strong leading body. And so that is some training that I've had to take online, and it has been very useful, and I thought that those perspectives might be useful for the board. In my 4 years here, I have seen a need for that. I think that it's an issue that needs to be raised. And Superintendent, thank you for listening. President Nigro, I will turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I add one more piece to that? In support of what Linda is saying, I think also, I have brought it up here in regards to the ombudsman position. I think it needs to be a larger agency goal as far as diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And I think as board members, we need to make sure we are doing our part to emulate that as best as possible. And be role models in that way. And I would support any type of training that, as a board member, that we could participate in. I know that there's things out of Harvard and a few other places on implicit bias assessments and then follow-up trainings and things like that. And I just think it would be good for us to sort of do a little self-analysis and check ourselves.
All right, thank you, Sue King. With that, I'll move that we set the proposed work study for October 20th, and that we have one at a date to be named later about the strategic plan and the progress thereof.
This is Board Member Jantz. I've been thinking, since Linda and Suke made their comments, also prior to the meeting, a community member did come up to me and give me their thoughts and their opinions. It was a staff person who told me that the board is dysfunctional. And that was something that was brought to my attention. And so I feel like maybe a board retreat might help bring the board together. And it was really a valid point and a good suggestion, something that I've been thinking over, and especially as Linda and Suke made their comments. I suggest that the board take some time to get together privately and to talk about why we're here. You know, we're here for the kids. We're here for the kids, and the executive team is here for the kids. The staff, the teachers, those who work in transportation, instructional aides, support staff, we're all here for the kids. And so we need to get back to a position where we're remembering the reason that we're here, and we're here for the kids. And it's something that we always need to keep in the back of our mind. And so I suggest that we perhaps consider a retreat or some opportunity to get together to talk things over, because whether we like it or not, part of that sunset audit and part of the master facilities plan will require some tough decisions. And we want to be able to make those decisions with the kids' best interest in mind. And we need to focus on our ability to work together to get to that place.
Okay, we certainly can do that in the context of the November-December meeting. You know, again, it can't be in private, it's got to be open. Doesn't necessarily have to be broadcast or recorded, but it does have to be open to the public and properly noticed.
President Nigro, we have done similar to work study as a retreat where it was open to the public. We just did not allow for, let's just say we were able to contain commentary and include public in part of that discussion.
Yeah, no, we've certainly done it before. We can. We just, you know, we have to follow the rules.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, I mean, we can certainly do that in the meeting for the strategic plan. So again, I've moved to set that meeting on a date to be determined and set the October 20th date for the master facility plan. Is there a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No, okay. Action item 9.01, adjournment.
This is Commissioner Jantz.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yes, PV?
Thank you. I wanted to make sure that we continue the discussion for future agenda items, for future board meetings. There are two things that I think are important that we need to consider as future agenda items. First, I think as a board, we do need to get together and consider possible ramifications of policy changes when it comes to contracts. We may need to get the Assistant AG feedback on that. I want to make sure that we're all on the same page with a common understanding of our responsibilities when it comes to the contracts, and make sure that we have full understanding. Secondly, we also need to recognize and understand, that for language acquisition, we are actually incorporating early learning, and that we have something on the agenda to talk things over so we can see those specialized services identified and provided for early intervention for those who are birth to 3, plus for those who are in preschool. I also would like to continue the discussion of the ASL specialists in the K-12 arena, and also the funding sources, and that could be something that the Finance Committee could talk over. I thought that that was a decision that had already been made. I thought that we were already providing that service in early intervention, but we're not providing those comprehensive services like O&M, evaluation services for students who are blind. But those are services that we should be providing to the students long before they come onto campus, when they're in that home environment. So we need to have a discussion about how we can ensure that those resources are in place in those areas. That's an area that the board needs to take action to address.
Okay. Superintendent, you note the same? Now we go on to 9.01, action item adjournment.
This is Lynn.
You move to adjourn, Lynn?
I do move.
Thank you. Is there a second?
This is UK, I second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the staff. I know we're back in person. Again, thank you for producing a great meeting.